our next speaker is Stephen Vance. He's the founder and CEO of Chicago Cityscape, a startup that makes open data about neighborhood statistics and property development patterns, makes it more accessible to residents and real estate professionals. He's also the deputy editor of Streets Blog Chicago, which reports on transportation and land use news and policy. So, welcome, Steve.
Okay, so when you are traveling through certain neighborhoods of the city's south and west sides, you'll see a lot of vacant lots like this. And when you walk through there, you'll sometimes see the concrete foundations that used to hold a 20-unit courtyard building. You'll often also see these cow paths or desire paths that people, when they cut across a corner lot, they create a dirt path. And so this scene, this satellite photo, is could be almost anywhere in Chicago on the south and west sides. But if it weren't for the green line running down the middle here, which is about a mile away, you wouldn't know that this is Washington Park, because it could look like Austin or Bronzeville or East Garfield Park, or but it could also look like a lot of other cities: Baltimore, St. Louis, Detroit. So I was reading recently an article in Next City, which is an online magazine, about this new tool that the state of New York is going to buy for some of the municipalities in New York to combat the vacancies in the abandoned buildings. And this quote stuck out at me because after I finished reading it, I was disagreeing with the premise of the article, that it was the lack of tools to tie all that data together. I think that we actually have a different problem in Chicago, and that we have the tools, we don't have the data. Even though, as Tom Schenk outlined, there are hundreds of data sets that the city offers, but the city isn't the only holder of data. Running Chicago Cityscape, these are the kinds of questions that I've figured out that people want to ask. And the last one is one of the most important, is where to find that. And so each of those data points are often in a separate data store. And so let me tell you about Chicago Cityscape. I first started working, well, it's that, and it's what I was introduced with. But I first started working with open data about 2010 when I came across some traffic crash data. And so for the past 7 years, since I graduated from UIC in the Urban Planning College, I've mostly been working on projects around transportation systems. And so I developed the first bike crash map ever in Chicago. And actually since then I've updated it, kept it up to date every year when the city or the state releases more crash data. But I also host the state's only crash map nowadays because they took their own down. And actually, I should go back a little, because that data is not necessarily open data, because I have to bug them every year for it. And part of open data is that it's prevalent or present all the time. And so I started Chicago Cityscape for a more personal reason. So those crash maps were more for the blog that I write with my writing partner, John Greenfield, to analyze the safety of traffic in the city. And so I started Chicago Cityscape because I was looking for a contractor to install the Kirby. And the Kirby is in the photo on the left that the man in the red shirt is holding on to. It is a footrest and handrest for cyclists to wait at stoplights more comfortably. And it's modeled after the design in Copenhagen, which was the first, I think the first in the world to install these. And this is my friend Ryan, who helped, or he designed it. He's an architect. And then this is the alderman of the 27th Ward, because we needed to get his permission to install it on the city sidewalk. And so we got the permission, and now we needed a contractor to install it. And so the city had a list, just a list of like thousands of contractors that they had licensed. But you couldn't search it, sort it, or filter it. And so I'm like, how am I supposed to choose a contractor out of 3,000 of them? So I remade the list. I had to scrape it by copying and pasting like 50 different pages and putting them into one CSV file. And then I created a new list. But the thing is, my new list wasn't really any better, except that you could sort it by address or name or phone number or city. And you could type in words like Acme or ABC, because a lot of companies actually have those in their names still to be first in the list. And so browsing through the open data portal that Tom manages, I found the building permits data set. And so it has the contractors' names in there and the jobs that they do. And actually, here's a screenshot of it. So I could link the two together, the contractor name and the jobs they do, and then perhaps search through the job descriptions or the project descriptions and find work that was similar to installing metal objects in public right-of-way. We ended up installing it ourselves. So data portals are excellent. I love them. Chicago Cityscape uses them automatically in the background. The servers are running, they're humming along, grabbing data from all these data portals, and then putting it together on a public website. But the county, the state, and the city all have portals, and then the Census Bureau has their public-facing portal, which is the American Fact Finder, but they also provide more raw data. Sometimes you have to get it through the FTP site. Sometimes you get it through Tiger if you're looking for the geographic data. US Census also has an API, which I'll talk about soon. But portals are essentially just maps and spreadsheets, and they're all unconnected. So when you're looking at the building permits data set, you're not necessarily seeing the building violations data set, which go hand in hand because a project happens and then there's a violation because they didn't do a good job, or the violation happens and there's a project to fix the violation. And so when you go to Chicago Cityscape, you're presented with all those data sets, but a more human-friendly, pleasing visual. And so this is the most common kind of page that people will look at. And at the top, it has the address and then the job description, a photo that's provided by the county assessor. And then you also see the contractors and the architects and also any other associated companies that the city collects data from on the building permit application. And so then what Chicago Cityscape does is it combines a lot of data sets. And so you start with the address, you go to the workers, and you click on one of the workers, and you can see all of their other jobs in the city of Chicago since 2006. You can also go to another part of the site, and you can get tax information. So here we have the owner's name. Someone asked about privacy. That's actually been an issue I've encountered a few times and have had to come up with policies or ways to respond to those challenges. And then we also have the history. And so this property actually collected, or the county collected $0, so it was probably vacant for those years. Or it was exempt for whatever reason, like if it was owned by a church or another exempt organization. And so the other major feature that Chicago Cityscape has that combines data sets is the Community Data Explorer. And so how many of you have wanted to get census data, but for a boundary that doesn't actually line up with tracts and block groups? At least one person. 2 people. 3. Okay. More hands. So that happens a lot with people who aren't researchers or professional data wranglers. Neighborhood organizations, like just a bunch of neighbors who form a block group to try to petition their city council member to make sure that the trees are watered on time, which is like a super low-level concern that a lot of neighbors have, but they have ridiculous concerns sometimes, and I get to hear them all. So you choose a boundary that is pre-existing on the website, and there's over 14,000 boundaries, or 14,000 ways that you can divide up Cook County. One of the data sets actually that I really appreciate is the municipal annex data set. It is when you're part of the city, like Hyde Park, when it was annexed into the city of Chicago. They went back 160 years and came up with every map to show the how Cook County became Cook County. So then let's say West Loop, and it says custom place because someone else told me these are the boundaries of the West Loop, because the city doesn't maintain anymore an official neighborhood map. It maintains, of course, the community area map, which is like fixed boundaries. We're never going to change those. So how do we get data for that arbitrary boundary? Well, it shows you every intersecting tract or block group, your choice, and then you click on each ones that you want to combine into an export. And so these 3 rows are highlighted and say those represent the 3 census tracts, or there might be others that I've clicked on that say these represent the West Loop. Where they split, I'm just going to ignore those parts of my boundary because I'll get too much of another neighborhood. And then you'll click export, and you can download it as a map or as a spreadsheet. And so this was a direct response from a neighborhood group in Jefferson Park that had formed a couple of years ago in response to another neighborhood group, and they had differing values about what kinds of housing they wanted to allow in their neighborhood. And so they needed to do research of what kinds of housing exist in their neighborhood, and this will tell you. And so I've already talked about a few kinds of users of Chicago Cityscape. Over the years, I've found that they kind of come on 2 spectrum. The vertical one is what they're using it for, and the horizontal one is like, do they want local data or do they want citywide or neighborhood data? And so I've put them into 4 typologies. We have our property developer, our architect, our residents, or our advocate. Well, actually they fit into a lot of different categories, and then our researchers. And so developers are out there to use data to make money. So am I. So they want to know what the pulse of the neighborhood is and where they should develop next. They want to know who their competition is. So they can look at the building permits and see, okay, this company has built a 40-story high-rise. And I can also see where they're also developing. And so maybe I'm a newcomer. I want to see where I can fill niches or gaps. Architects are really easy to pin down on what kind of information they want. They're really job-specific or site-specific, and so they just need to know everything that there is to know about a property. And before Chicago Cityscape, you would have to look at half a dozen. So I interviewed some of the architects, and they would say, well, first I go to this website and I copy this information. Then I take it and I put it over here, and I get this information from that website, and on and on and on. And finally, after 2 hours, they'll have half the information they need. And so residents are interested in what's happening on their own block, what their city council member is up to, what their neighbors are up to. So a couple features that were built on Chicago Cityscape in direct response to neighborhood or neighbor concerns were teardowns. So a teardown is when you demolish a good building, like it's livable right now, but you demolish it and you build something usually larger in its place and often less dense. And so this has major impacts on a community because when your neighborhood gets less dense, you can't support as many small businesses. And so, and also you're losing buildings of potential historic or architectural significance, and this neighborhood group wanted to track those so they could gauge the extent of the problem and try to get a sneak peek or a preview of what was on the table. And then the other feature is an alert for those demolitions. So every morning, some people get an alert of all the demolitions that were permitted yesterday. And the thing is about demolitions, though, they can happen as soon as the permit is issued. Actually, sometimes they happen before the permit is issued on the pretense that the permit will be issued. And if it isn't, they'll pay a small fine, but they got what they wanted in the end, which is this building to go away so we can immediately start constructing our new building. And so Gabriel, who is a photographer, and I'm featuring some of his photos, he is one of the few people in Chicago who has made it a mission to document every building before it's demolished. And so there are like 400,000 buildings in Chicago. They'll eventually all be demolished over the next few centuries or weeks. And so he gets these alerts, and thankfully he has a flexible job, and he's able to bike out there and get some photos of it. He also has a good system where he can predict a demolition based basically on its age and geography. Okay, so then our last group are the researchers. And so researchers is kind of a broad group. They're not always advocates, so I had them on the spectrum as being advocates, but their interests often align with the residents who are advocating for their own neighborhoods. And so researchers are like, there's a professor here at University of Chicago, and she uses it because she's trying to design a visualization of business typologies in certain neighborhoods. So she downloads some of the business data from Chicago Cityscape to be able to make those maps. Okay, so I want to come back to that premise in the article, in the Next City article that I opened with. And I changed the quote to put some brackets around the word not, because I totally believe that we don't have the data, but we do have the tools, and we have a lot of the skills in Chicago. So someone had asked about how do you promote all of these great things about data when you still have a digital literacy gap? In Chicago, there are programs that are trying to deal with that, but there are already a lot of us who are ready and willing to work together and build tools. I think that Chicago Cityscape counts as one of those tools. And so specifically, what are those data? So this is a screenshot of a presentation from a hackathon in Pilsen last November called Renter Power. Well, that was the name of their group, Renter Power. And they were the winning group at a hackathon. And so a hackathon is essentially you organize a bunch of people from different disciplines and professions and neighborhoods to organize around a topic. And you want to come up with some great ideas. Maybe you have some apps or some maps or just some documentation at the end. And you usually get a sponsor to like get you a cool gadget for the winning team. So the winning team came up with flowchart. That was basically the output at the end. And they wanted to be able to answer all these questions. So they live in Pilsen. Pilsen is gentrifying. So housing values are rising. People are getting displaced, evicted, or otherwise have to leave the neighborhood. And Pilsen is mostly Mexican, like almost about 90%, and not always English speaking. And so it's a marginalized group that is easy to displace. And so some groups are trying to fight back, and evictions are not always easy to fight back if you don't have lawyers, but they have other ways that these groups have developed to fight evictions. But they still need data, and they still need to be able to identify who's evicting them, who their landlord is. So if your building is owned by an LLC, well, that LLC might be owned by another LLC, which might be owned by another one. And so they have to, go through this chain to find who the actual owner is and target that person. So like I said, their output was flowcharts because all these data that they wanted exist in a dozen silos. And I was invited to serve as a resource to the hackathon. And I just happened to be sitting with that group when they came up with this idea, and I advised them to pause on their ambitions and actually recommend that their output should not be an app, should not be a website. It should be a documentation of how anyone can do this, and because it's not something that you can really do on your own. It took the 7 of them to come up with this flowchart, and they have it now in a more professional diagram using professional software, and they've started outlining, or they've started creating a website that is like a worksheet. So it's like, go to this website and come back and paste the information in here. We'll save it for you. Go to this second website, paste the information back in, and we'll keep a worksheet for you so that when you're done, you kind of have it all in an organized way. But a lot of the data they need is still closed. And so that's the data about property sales, How many you know about MLS, the multiple listing service where you find property for sale? That's a proprietary data set. But the sales of property is public information because you have to record it with your local county, which wants to sell it to you for $50,000 per year. Or they'll give you a cheaper data set that is of less quality. And then the taxes. A different organization, at least in Cook County, I know this is not true in a lot of places. In other jurisdictions, certain agencies have merged. And so in Cook County, we have 4 elected officials who all manage your property. You have the clerk, the assessor, the treasurer, and the recorder. 2 of them are being merged based on a referendum we had last November. I already forgot which 2 are being merged. I believe the recorder is going away, and those duties will be assumed by the clerk, but I could be mistaken. And so how did I get that tax data on the website? I scraped it. Scraping is when you tell a computer to copy and paste information from a web page millions of times over. So there are 1.8 million pins in Cook County. So a friend and I created a script that copied and pasted data from 1.8 million web pages. It takes a computer about 48 hours to do because you don't want to kill the server that you're scraping from because that'll just have backlash against your process. But I do it every year. Every time the new tax data comes out, I spin up a server and I have it do it again. And then proposals. So proposals are development companies come to the city and they say, I want to build something, high-rise here. And then they have to often send out a notice to all the property owners within 250 feet. Sometimes they also put up a poster. That is the extent of how you advertise your proposal in the city of Chicago. So I said that neighbors or residents want to know what's being proposed in their neighborhood. Sometimes they won't know until the day before construction, when they get a notice that the parking is restricted because the crew has to come in. And so those are the kinds of closed data that I want, to be open. And so, again, we have the tools, we have a lot of the data, but we still need to close the gap to make sure that we are investing in the right, or we're targeting our investments in the right parts, and we're being able to be predictive of where zombie properties, actually I don't really like that word, where vacant and abandoned properties can be located, and we can try to find ways to prevent a property from turning into that. And so I want everyone here to join me in educating our elected officials in all jurisdictions. I know a lot of you are from Wisconsin, which I think is really cool, that we have people from outside of Chicago, in educating your elected officials on the advantages of open data, and that's, I think, what this whole symposium is about, and then figuring out ways to actually convince them that it's in their advantage and in their constituents' advantage to have it released. So thank you for coming.
How come some of this information isn't available to you? I thought with Tom Schenk saying they have this whole open data at City Hall. I mean, why can't you get this? Why aren't they making the proposal information available?
Different agencies. So it's, with all the elected officials, they don't really have, I think, a reason to do things like to follow the mayor's lead because it doesn't really affect their position in their own agency. So a lot of the elected officials in those 4 county agencies, they get reelected. It's not a priority for them to modernize their systems. Also, Tom's data portal is releasing new data like on a monthly basis, and someone had asked him, how do you prioritize and how can we contribute and influence you on what data sets you have? He does that. I bug him every week, or his staff, Jonathan, because I want more data, and I know that he can figure out a way to get it, and sometimes he does. Sometimes the data set that I'm asking for is not on his priority. But I do need to spend a little more time myself going after those closed data sets and developing my own advocacy agenda to get them.
Seems to me some people would have a incentive not to have it be open. So the developers would, it seems to me like they might have an incentive to not have it be open data. I mean, they want to be able to go in there and do it, and they don't want the neighborhood saying no, right?
Oh, well, the thing is, they want to know what other developers are doing. They just don't want other developers to know what they're doing.
Okay.
But they want all the business intelligence they can get, and they're paying to use my site to get it.
Thanks for your talk. And are you familiar with, you must be, CMAP?
Yeah.
Where do they fit in this? They seem to be so up and down in providing data.
So they have a data portal called the CMAP Data Hub, but a lot of it is not real-time or updated data. So one of the advantages of the Chicago data portal is that it's updated on a nightly basis. So like building permits, they are issued every single day or every weekday. So it makes sense that that data set is updated every day. But CMAP is doing multi-year studies that don't really make sense to be updated that often. So sometimes you just have to bug CMAP to get the data out there. But it also, and they're willing to do that because they are very open, they're a very transparent agency, and they're required to do the work that they're doing by federal law. But I just don't think they have the data that really fits in to the platform that I've built. They do a lot of traffic analysis, pollution modeling. Yeah. So the one thing that they have that I want to integrate soon is a land use inventory. So I have, when I scrape the property tax information, the county assessor assigns a use code to that property, but it's different than what CMAP's land use inventory uses, which is a more national structure. I guess kind of like if you were to say take NAICS codes for workers, you would have this land use code for national land use inventories. And they update that like every 4 years because it's really difficult. You have to fly planes and use advanced computer vision techniques to like understand if those are residential buildings or commercial buildings on the ground.
All right, thank you very much, Stephen.